Hello students, wish you all a very good morning. Today I am going to continue my class about models. Previously I had already taught you about some of the models and their usages and 3 formulas for not making mistakes in models. So I had already taught you the usage of can, could, may and might. Today I'm going to continue with the rest of the models. So today let us start with should. Usage of should. Expressing an opinion or giving advice or asking for advice in present or future. For example, his birthday is coming up. I think we should send him a card. So you see, I think we should send him a card. So I'm expressing my opinion. To my mind, we should all switch to solar energy. So you see, with this should, I'm just suggesting or giving an advice. What do you think? Should I take up this offer? So in this case, I am asking for an advice. We have to keep in mind that expressing an opinion or giving advice or asking for advice in present or in future. Next, expressing an expectation. The negotiations should end soon. So I expect the negotiations to end soon. So I'm expressing my expectations. The negotiations should have ended by now. So I expect the negotiations to have ended. So this is expressing my expectation. Okay, so the third usage. Expressing your regret or criticizing someone about a past action. Should plus have done. I should have answered the phone. You shouldn't have laughed at her. So in the first case, I regret not answering the phone. So it is a past action. In the second case, you should not have laughed at her. So I'm just giving my opinion. I'm criticizing someone because I'm upset and angry that you laughed at her. Okay, next. Okay, now a note about ought to. Let us see. A note about ought to. Let us see it. A note about ought to. Ought to is synonymous for should. It sounds more formal than should and is less common, particularly in the question form. I think we ought to send him a card. So, it is similar to should, that is expressing your opinion. You can also use ought to in instead, but in the question form it is less common. Ought I to take up this offer is less common. The negotiations ought to end soon. You ought not to have laughed at her. So you see, ought to is synonymous to should. Next, a note about should in conditional one. What is conditional one? A note about should to in conditional one, that is in conditional sentences. You can use should in first conditional sentences, that is conditional one. This part, the first conditional part in a sentence, the first conditional sentence. So you can use should in first conditional sentence. Look, to indicate a small possibility. If I should visit Sydney again, I'll certainly contact you. So you see here we have used should. That means the chances to meet Sydney is very, very less. That is the reason we have used should here. That is to indicate a small possibility. Another, in formal English, should can replace if. Should you have any concerns, feel free to give me a call. You can also use if here. If you have any concerns, feel free to give me a call. Alright students, so next model is must. When do we use must? Number 1, expressing a necessity felt by the speaker to do or not to do something in present or future. So we all know that expressing a necessity, a vigorous necessity to do something, we use must. I am beginning to get a headache. I must take a break now. We must not assume that this information is correct. We must double check it. To express a necessity felt by the speaker in the past, what do we use? We use had to. Look, so must is for present and future, and for past we use had to. I was beginning to get a headache. I had to take a break. So must is expressing necessity felt by the speaker in present or future, and expressing necessity by the speaker in past is had to. Okay, next, deducing or assuming that something is true, positive sentences. So must is also used in deducing or assuming something is true only in positive sentences. She must be thrilled with these high marks on her tests. No one is answering the door. They must have all left the house. So, assuming something, deducing something. And to deduce something is impossible or not true, use can't or could not. Can't in present or future, could not in past. She could not be happy with these low marks in her tests. So, deducing or assuming in positive sentence, we use must. Deducing or assuming in negative sentences, or we use cannot or could not. Alright, now have to. When do we use have to? Expressing an external obligation in all tenses in positive sentences. She has to check that all the lights are out before she leaves the office. I will have to finish this assignment. So it is external obligation, not an internal feeling. Not an internal feeling. For internal feeling, we use must, and for external obligation, we use have to in all tenses but positive sentence. So I will have to finish this assignment. It is an external obligation. She has to check that all the lights. It is an external obligation. We had to queue for hours to buy tickets. It is an external obligation. And number 2, removing a necessity felt by the speaker or an external obligation in case of negative sentences. So in case of positive sentences, it is expressing an external obligation, and in case of negative sentences, removing a necessity felt by the speaker or an external obligation, we use have to in all tenses. I am sure this information is accurate. We don't have to double check it. We don't have to. We did not have to queue because we had already bought our tickets. Previously, it was an external obligation in positive sentence, so we had to queue. Now it is removing the necessity for external obligation. So we didn't have to queue because we had already bought our tickets. Now this is very important, you see. The main difference between must and have to is that must is a necessity felt by the speaker, whereas have to is an external obligation or a rule, or removing the external obligation or the rule in case of negative sentences. So must is necessity felt by the speaker. Have to is external obligation. If this distinction is not important, or if this distinction is not clear, sorry, I have written in a very bad way. If this distinction, which distinction? Necessity felt by the speaker and external obligation or a rule. If this distinction is not clear in a sentence, it is not clear in a sentence, you can use must and have to interchangeably in a positive sentence. However, be careful that in the negative, must not is still a necessity or an obligation not to do something, a prohibition, whereas don't have to removes the necessity of obligation. So basically what I intend to say is that you can use must or have to in a sentence. Both you can use both in a sentence if in that particular sentence necessity and external obligation is not clearly differentiated or clearly stated. You can use either one, but only in case of positive sentences. Only for positive sentences you can interchange must and have to if, I repeat, if external obligation or a rule and necessity felt by the speaker is not clearly differentiated, then only you can use either must or have to in positive sentences. Okay, one more thing. A note about need to. If the distinction between speaker's opinion and external obligation is unimportant, you can also use need to instead of must and have to. I must take a break. I need to take a break. I have to take a break. We didn't have to queue. We didn't need to queue. So you see, for positive sentences, if there is no clear distinction between speaker's opinion and external obligation, you can use must, you can use need to, you can use have to. But in case of negative sentences, you can use have to or need to, but not must. In case of negative sentences. All right, students. So now we will proceed to the next model, usage of will. Will. We all know that will is a model that we use for forming future simple tense. So, formulation of the future simple tense with all pronouns to express a possibility, predict something, volunteer or make an instant decision, or make a promise. So, we use will for formulation of the future simple tense with all pronouns to express a possibility like maybe I will drop in and see you tomorrow. So express a possibility. Next, to predict something. I have a feeling he will turn down my invitation. So it is for predicting. Then we use will for volunteering something or making an instant decision. You look exhausted. I will let you rest. And finally, to make a promise, everything in future tense. I won't tell anyone what you said. Okay, so I will not tell anyone what you said. So I'm making a promise here. Every time we use will only for expressing in future tense. We have to remember that. And second usage for informal requests. It is okay with friends, close colleagues, relatives, but not in formal situations. Will you put the rubbish out, please? For formal situations, I have told you before, we use may or even can. Can is also more friendly, but we use may. May you please put the rubbish out, please? Or may, or here you can also use can you put the rubbish out, please? So in this case, in formal cases we use may instead of will, but we use will to make informal requests, not formal requests, but informal requests. It is okay with friends, close colleagues and relatives, and for formal situations we mainly use may. Okay, students? Okay, just now we studied about will, and now we are going to learn about would. Would. When do we use would? to express a habitual action in the past that is similar to used to. Very, very important. For would we use in case of past, and will we use to refer to future actions. But for would we use we use it for habitual action in past that is similar to used to. Okay, so habitual action in the past and it is similar to used to. Look at the example. When she was a child, she would sit under a tree and draw for hours. So it shows the child's habitual action of sitting under a tree and drawing for hours. So when she was a child, she used to sit under a tree and draw for hours. Same thing. Next, it is also an alternative to could you for making a polite request. Would you hold the line for a moment, please? Could you hold the line for a moment, please? So same thing. Would you? Could you? Same thing. It is an alternative for making a polite request. Next, in polite expressions, I would love to know more about your country. I would love to know more about your country. I want to know more about your country. If we say, I want to know more about your country, it would be much more formal and, a kind of, you can say, impolite. Not so much polite or refined, but this expression, I would love to know more about your country, is much more refined or polite. I wouldn't like to interrupt in your work. I don't want to interrupt your work. So this is also correct. But this way of saying with would is much more refined. So it is used for polite expressions. Number 4, formulation of conditional 2 and conditional 3 sentences. Previously we had seen about conditional 1 sentence, that is should. And for conditional 2 and conditional 3 we use would. So for conditional 2 and conditional 3 we use would. Fortunately, she is away. If she were here, this is conditional 1 part of the sentence. This is conditional 2 part of the sentence. This is first part of the sentence. This is the conditional, 1, and this is conditional 2. So this is first part of the sentence, this is conditional 1 and this is conditional 2. So for conditional 1 we could have used should, but for conditional 2 and conditional 3 sentences we use would. So fortunately she is away. If she were here, she would stop us. Fortunately she was away last night. If she had been there, she would have stopped us. So, would is used for conditional 2 and conditional 3 sentences, and for conditional 1 sentences we use should or if. Alright students, and now the last model we need to know, that is shall. Many students ask me, ma'am, when do we use will and when do we use shall? Many students ask me. So let us see. Will used to refer future action. Same for shall. Formulation of future simple tenses. Will for all pronouns, but shall for only pronouns I and we. More formal and less common than will. So shall and will, the basic difference. Will is used for all pronouns. And will is less formal. Shall is used for pronouns I and we, and it is more formal, like may. May, in case of asking permission, it is more formal. Similar is shall. So you see, shall is used for formulation of the future simple tense with pronouns I and we, and it is more formal and less common than will. You look exhausted, I shall let you rest. So for I, you can use will and shall, both, but shall is more formal. A teacher can say shall to a student, you look exhausted, my dear, I shall let you rest. But when a friend is talking to a friend, it is better, you look exhausted, I will let you rest. Will is, something like as if it is your discretion. It is something like your allowance. But shall is something more, formal, and as if it is required. So that's the reason it is more formal. So I shan't tell anyone what you said. So with I and we, for future simple tense, we use shall. Next, offering to do something with the pronoun I in the question form. You look exhausted. Shall I make you a cup of tea? What shall I prepare for your dinner? Alright, next, third usage. Making a suggestion or asking for a suggestion with the pronoun we in the question form. It's too hot indoors. Shall we sit outside? How shall we go about resolving this issue? Expressing a duty in formal documents and contracts. The borrower shall pay the installments in arrears. So you see, making a suggestion or asking for a suggestion with the pronoun we in question form, we use shall. And you see, offering to do something with the pronoun I in question form, we use shall. So finally, making a suggestion or asking for a suggestion with we, and offering to do something with I, we use shall, both in question form. And finally, expressing a duty in formal documents and contracts, mainly legal documents, where expressing a duty is concerned, we use shall. So students, I hope that you have understood the models, and I think you should once again revise from the beginning, because this is very, very confusing. Very soon I will give you exercises based on models. Thank you so much for watching the video. In case you have any problem, you can always contact me. Alright students, bye bye.